Hi everyone and welcome back. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and here we are covering everything about microservices. Initially we covered the REST services, and then we started talking about the GraphQL, and I covered like 6 to 7 videos which is talking about NestJS Graphql implementation, which is a schema based implementation. And now what is left? So if you talk about this architecture, we were talking about Apollo Graphql Federation and how we can compose the data coming from different GraphQL services. We have already built the auth service and the gateway service. Now we can create a simple housing service, and we will see how we can reference the user schema from this to this, so that like in the auth service we have a user entity, and how we can reference the user service into a housing service, so that let's say if I want to send a query, okay, give me all the houses bought by this particular user, then I can fetch the user information at gateway level from this housing service and the auth service. It's like a schema composition happening at the gateway level. Okay, so this is what we are going to build, and these are like all the videos we have covered. So you need to first go through all of these, and then you can start the next one. And what we have already achieved is, this is the auth service, this is the gateway service, which is using a gateway router. Here you can see Apollo gateway, and here we are passing the subgraph, like I'm just passing auth API which I have, and this is my gateway service. So similarly I'm going to have another service added here which is home, and this is like a home API. So that we are going to build. So we will just copy the auth service and we'll do changes on that. This we have already covered in the previous video, what all things we are doing with the handle authentication, passing the context, and using this Apollo driver. Now there are two aspects. Maybe people will say, okay, we may not have a GraphQL sub-services, but we still want to have a same kind of implementation. Obviously you cannot have Apollo GraphQL gateway, using Apollo Federation if you don't have a GraphQL service. Let's say I just have a simple REST APIs. Then I can still use a simple Apollo server, not a GraphQL gateway, and I can compose. I mean, it's not really a composition, it's all about data fetching, and then composition you will do manually at the Apollo GraphQL server. So that we can just see how that is happening. So if I talk about the REST implementation, here if you just see, this documentation clearly says, and I have done this using REST data source. Let's say you already have your legacy REST APIs already created, and now you wanted to expose a GraphQL implementation on top of your REST APIs. What you can do is you can create a REST data source for each and every microservice which you already have. Let's say auth service, housing, and booking. You just need to pass let's say this is like a data source class I need to create for each and every microservice, which will have a base URL, and here you will just write your methods. And what you will do, you will just call this .axios or this .get, all these methods, this .get movie, await this .get movie. So this is like same as making the API call and trying to fetch the data, because it is implementing REST data source. So it is providing all these methods, get, put, post, delete, patch methods. And how actually we will access this data source while you create your GraphQL database server. Let's come to the example where we are populating the context. Okay, yeah, here what you will do is, when you start a GraphQL server, you will provide these data sources in the context, so that at the resolver level, you should be able to access this data. Okay, let me just show you the real example. I just need to scroll up a little bit so that I can talk about this particular portion. Yes, here it is. So I'm writing a resolvers, and once you have a data source inside a GraphQL context, you will access the data source. Okay, movie API, home API, booking API, and get movie, update movie, delete movie, fetch movie. All those different methods you can call. So this is a simple implementation. You can just try a simple POC. Let's say you have a legacy REST APIs and you want to now provide a single GraphQL interface on top of those REST APIs. That is possible, and that works really nice, and I have done that. I can maybe give us some example reference. So you just create a REST data source. It's all about, okay, in this Apollo server, I need a user data. So it will make an explicit call. This will get a housing data. So it's like a data source you have created, which is REST data source, which will make a REST API call. Apollo Federation also does the same thing, just only, but it needs the GraphQL interface exposed, not the REST interface. And it does the schema stitching and composition and all those things on top of that. Okay, so where we are currently, we are building this gateway, and we are going to look at these different directives provided by Apollo GraphQL gateway. So this is the gateway, and this is how we are introspecting and composing the different microservices. Okay, I wanted to just talk about simple examples, then we will move to building our another service. Okay, so that we can just take a look into the demo example. Let's move here. So what we want to build now is another service, let's say home service, or another service, let's say booking. So what we are trying to do here is this is the gateway, and this gateway should be able to compose the subgraphs coming from these graphs, GraphQL APIs, user, home, manager, or the booking manager service. And the only thing is there are downsides of the introspect and compose. What it needs is when you are running this gateway, all these endpoints should be up and running, because it is doing these things at the runtime. So there is another solution is remote GraphQL endpoints, which will not look for the runtime execution. I mean, fetching the schema at the runtime. So both these endpoints should be up and running and working perfectly fine. Then only it can create the gateway instance, otherwise it will break. Now what we are going to do is I will just create a copy of auth service into packages, because a lot of things we are going to do the same. So it's better to create a copy instead of writing all these things again and again. So we already have the authorization logic added here, and simple bit authorization and guard logic added here. NestJS guard we are using on protected routes, which will not allow you to access the data until unless you have authorization header. So similarly, these all are protected APIs, because you will access these APIs once you are already logged in. So we have a JWT auth guard and admin guard, because admin can only assign a user houses and can create a booking for the user for buying a house, a simple backend implementation. So this is auth service. We'll just rename it to home service or home manager. Now the entities will be different here. We can still use the domain module, and if we look at the domain module, it's kind of a same code, because we are writing another service, but it's going to be using same stuff. We just use the different modules. Instead of user module, now we will use home module, a home entity, home schema and all, booking schema and all. So it's like a housing platform. So user can do the login and can buy a house. So house will have some facilities, some features like, okay, 2 BHK, 3 BHK, number of rooms, all the facilities, like there is a swimming pool and all the features which talks about the home, that will be there. And then there is a home entity. So here, instead of auth and user, we are going to create some separate entities. Auth we can still keep. Instead of user, we will just create another folder which is home, and inside home we will create a home entity, home resolver, home schema and all. So let's do that. First of all, let's check the existing code. What do we have? These are the GraphQL classes. These will override. This is our app module, which is importing domain module. Inside domain module, we are using GraphQL module.forRoot, passing the context, using the Apollo Federation driver, and passing all the definitions. So in the source, we will generate this GraphQL.class.ts, and it will look for all the .graphql file inside your domain and in subfolders, because that contains the schema like home schema, home facility schema and all. Now there are some particular attributes or the directives we will be using. Let's talk about that at the rate key, if we can fetch something. Okay, yes, this is important. These are like how we create different directives. So these are the directives which we need to use across services. So user is already a microservice which has a user schema. Now how can I reference the user schema here inside another microservice? So that is being done with the help of these entities and the schemas. So this is product subgraph. Okay, so if you wanted to reference it in another microservice, because it's like it is again finally going to recompose and create a single schema. So if you are not using at the rate key and using and putting all these product schema at multiple graphical services, then there will be a conflict. So what we are saying is there is a type product defined somewhere, and I'm just redefining it and reusing it. So defining a key is, this is how we define it. So this is how, like, in the subgraph, product subgraph is already there, and here I'm just referencing it through the key. So this another microservice will use this ID to fetch the data of product from the product microservice. So this is how we will create a resolve reference, and because here we are using product, so it will call this particular microservice and will make the get product by ID. This is how we will resolve the reference across microservices, because I want to get the details of all the homes and their respective user, or a user with all the homes that he has already bought. So user reference will be resolved through the user microservice, and the home reference will be resolved through the home manager service, right? So this is how we will reference the product entity. This is like a product subgraph, and this is inventory subgraph. When you use at the rate key, that means it is ready. It is, you are not overriding it. It is, you are just reusing and then referencing it. So user reference is already created in the auth service. In the home manager, we will just use at the rate key to say, okay, this reference is already created, and we are just creating a referencing. So here referencing an entity without contributing. So these are the entities we are going to use, and there are multiple directives. Actually, we haven't used all of these, like extend, shareable, inaccessible, override. If you want to override the definition, extends at the rate key. Extend if your subgraph library supports. Extend like you wanted to extend a particular type to a different one. There is another is a shareable. So what I'm saying is type position has these two attributes which are shareable, and I can just like these are the at the rate shareable. You can also even make the type shareable, so those types can be shared across services, and you can just particular say, okay, this variable is inaccessible across microservices. So these are custom directives. You can also override the field definition in another service. And this is external. Indicate the subscribe user can't resolve a particular field object, but still need to define that field for other purpose. Okay, name external, because this cannot be resolved here, so it is external. Okay, so let's dive into the code. What we are going to do is, we already have, I think, auth guards. Admin guard is already there. Only admin users can do that, and auth guard is already created in the last video. What auth guard does is, it is using these JWT strategies, auth strategy, and auth strategy is extracting the token from the authorization header and validating it if it is valid. So we need to see how we can validate the JWT payload here. We don't need to write it because we don't have the auth service here. So we'll modify this auth strategy for the home manager service. We will just check if, okay, the user exists and the token is valid. Then allow that user to access the resources. Okay, let's start writing the code, and let's see how it goes.